While encounters with grizzly bears are relatively rare, they are among the most terrifying experiences, even for seasoned hunters. Despite their massive size, grizzlies are adept swimmers, a skill one used to launch a deadly attack on a hunter. Join us as we recount the harrowing story of a hunter who set out for a successful catch, but found himself being the prey instead. The wilderness of Kamchatka, a remote expanse in Russia's Far East, was a place where nature's raw power reigned supreme. This rugged land, with its active volcanoes, towering mountains, and dense forests, was home to the formidable Kamchatka grizzly bear, known for its enormous size and unpredictable nature. Sergei Alexeyevich, a seasoned hunter, thrived in this harsh environment. Known for his quiet resolve and systematic approach, he was a solitary figure deeply connected to the land he navigated. Today, Sergei embarked on his routine bear hunt, armed with his rifle and heavy pack. The hunt was not just a practice, but a pursuit of mastery over the wilderness. Navigating the dense forest, Sergei, familiar with every sign and sound, moved purposefully. Hours passed in silence, disturbed only by the occasional bird call or rustling wind. As he approached the riverbank, the air grew colder, carrying the damp scent of the river and the subtle hint of a predator's presence. Crouching low, Sergei found fresh bear tracks, massive impressions in the soft earth. His senses heightened, and his movements became more deliberate, signaling that the hunt was about to intensify. He continued forward, following the tracks with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. The river, swollen from recent rains, rushed noisily through the landscape, its currents swift and cold. Sergei moved parallel to it, eyes darting from the tracks to the dense foliage ahead. It was here, near the water's edge, that he unknowingly made a critical mistake. The terrain was unfamiliar, and as he maneuvered through a narrow passage between two large boulders, he found himself in a small, secluded clearing. The scent of the river masked the presence of the bear. Sergei didn't see it at first, the massive creature camouflaged by the thick brush. It was when he stepped into the clearing that everything happened at once. The grizzly, enormous male, easily weighing over 800 pounds, had been resting by the riverbank, its thick fur soaked from a recent foray into the water. Startled by Sergei's sudden appearance, the bear rose to its full height on its hind legs, towering over the hunter. There was no time for Sergei to react. In an instant, the bear's primal instinct took over, and it charged with a speed and ferocity that belied its size. Sergei, frozen in that brief moment of recognition, barely had time to raise his rifle before the bear was upon him. The impact was devastating. The bear's massive paw swiped across Sergei's chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. His rifle was knocked from his hands, clattering uselessly to the side. The initial strike had broken several ribs, and Sergei's body screamed in agony as he tried to push himself up. Blood dripped from deep gashes across his torso, and the sharp pain in his side made it difficult to breathe. But there was no time to process the injury, no time to think. The bear, driven by a mix of fear and rage, did not relent. It came down on Sergei with its total weight, its powerful jaws snapping inches from his face. Instinct took over. Sergei reached for his knife, the only weapon he had left. His fingers, slick with blood, fumbled at his belt, but he managed to free the blade just as the bear lunged again. With all the strength he could muster, Sergei slashed at the beast's side, the knife sinking into the thick fur and muscle. The bear roared in pain, rearing back momentarily, but the wound was superficial. It only seemed to fuel the creature's aggression. Before Sergei could make another move, the bear swiped again, this time striking his leg. The force of the blow sent a sharp pain shooting through his body, and he felt the bone crack. The bear's jaws clamped down on his shoulder, the teeth puncturing deep into muscle and flesh. Sergei's vision blurred, the searing pain overwhelming his senses, but he fought against the rising tide of unconsciousness. He had to survive. He had to keep fighting. The river, once a distant murmur, was now dangerously close. In their struggle, Sergei and the bear had moved to the water's edge. Icy spray hit Sergei's legs as the bear dragged him toward the shallows. Despite his efforts to resist by clutching at mud and rocks, the bear's immense strength and the powerful current overwhelmed him. The freezing water surged around them, intensifying the bear's attack. Sergei's strength waned as the cold drained his energy, turning each breath into a struggle. The bear's relentless assault pulled him deeper into the river, and Sergei's limbs grew numb, his vision blurring. The roar of the river and the bear's growls merged into a chaotic symphony as his world darkened. In his final moments, Sergei's thoughts lingered not on fear but on the wilds that had shaped his life. When authorities arrived, alerted by Sergei's absence, they found a grim scene. The riverbank was stained with blood, and the disturbed earth and broken branches marked the violent struggle. Sergei's body was partially submerged downstream, the cold waters having carried him away. His rifle lay untouched several feet away from the attack site. The tracks revealed the bear's path. It had retreated into the forest, wounded but alive. The authorities, well versed in Kamchatka's dangers, issued warnings to the community. Sergei's tragic end served as a stark reminder of the wilderness's unpredictability. The village, once secure in its knowledge of the land, now faced an uneasy reality. Even the most experienced hunters could fall victim to its untamed power. The vast Canadian wilderness, with its towering pines, jagged ridgelines, and still lakes, felt like a different world to those accustomed to urban life. A group of corporate executives seeking a challenging week of wilderness survival training arrived in this remote expanse, unaware of how intense their experience would become. Guided by 3 instructors, Gunnar Alaric, a stern, seasoned guide, Licky Borchard, an expert in foraging and shelter building, and Abram Martel, a skilled tracker, the executives embarked on a team-building adventure. They were equipped with basic survival skills but were unprepared for the rawness of their environment. The first 2 days were productive. Gunnar taught navigation using stars and a compass, Licky demonstrated shelter construction with deadfall and branches, and Abram led tracking exercises. The executives, though tired and sore, were proud of their progress. However, on the 3rd night, things began to unravel. After a strenuous day, the group settled near their campsite for dinner. Despite warnings, some food scraps were left out, the scent of roasted meat lingering in the air. Exhaustion and a sense of accomplishment led to complacency. As the fire died and the group retired to their shelters, a calm wind rustled through the forest. The night was clear and peaceful, but Abram, the experienced tracker, felt an uneasy sense of familiarity with the distant rustle. This sound suggested something significant was moving through the forest. Far from the camp, a grizzly bear prowled. Its powerful nose detected the lingering scent of food, drawing it closer to the campsite. The bear, solitary and hungry, moved with deliberate steps through the trees, its massive form casting an ominous shadow as it approached. The bear's approach was slow but inevitable. In the vastness of the wilderness, predators like the grizzly had long learned patience and caution. It circled the camp from a distance, analyzing the scene with primal intelligence. The smell of meat mixed with the human scent had brought it here, and its hunger overcome any fear it might have harbored. It continued its slow, deliberate approach. Within the camp, everything was still. The fire had long died out, and the stars above provided the only light. A faint breeze stirred the tree branches. The instructors and executives lay inside their shelters, oblivious to the approaching danger. The bear moved with a quietness that belied its immense size. It sniffed at the air, edging closer to the remnants of the evening's dinner. The improperly stored food, still faintly warm from the fire, was the perfect bait. Without warning, the bear ransacked the area, upending pots, pans, and bags in search of nourishment. The sound was sudden and violent, a crash of metal and fabric. Gunnar was the first to awaken. His instincts kicked in before his mind could fully process the scene. The smell, the sound. He knew exactly what was happening. His heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed for the bear spray that was always close at hand, but the bear was quicker than anyone could have anticipated. It had found food, and its hunger made it bold. The camp exploded into chaos. As the bear tore through the campsite, it came upon the first unlucky participant. A man named Tobin Winslow, one of the younger executives, had pitched his shelter too close to where the food had been left. In a matter of moments, the bear had him pinned beneath its weight, its jaws sinking into his leg with terrifying force. His screams pierced the night, waking the others with a jolt of terror. There was no mistaking the sound. They were under attack. The executives, once confident in their newly acquired skills, were now paralyzed by fear. The bear's immense size and ferocity shattered any illusions they had of controlling their environment. In the dim light, they could see the massive silhouette of the bear, its eyes glowing with a predatory gleam, its fur bristling as it ransacked the area. Tobin's body was flailing, blood pooling beneath him as the bear thrashed him around like a rag doll. Instructors Gunnar, Lakey, and Abram sprang into action, their training kicking in as the situation escalated. The bear spray, their last defense, was quickly deployed. Gunnar tried to approach Tobin, but the Grizzly's attention shifted to Astrid Forrester, who had made the fatal error of running. In the chaos, Astrid fled toward the trees, but the bear, reacting to the movement, charged after her with terrifying speed. It knocked her to the ground with a brutal swipe, sending her sprawling. The bear loomed over her, jaws dripping, ready to strike again. The scene was chaotic. Gunnar's hand trembled as he discharged a cloud of bear spray, the pungent mist forcing the Grizzly to recoil momentarily, its eyes watering. Yet the spray wasn't enough to fully drive the bear away. With the bear dazed but still present, Gunnar and Abram dragged Tobin, who lay bleeding and unconscious, away from immediate danger. Lick hurried to assess Astrid's injuries. She lay still, likely suffering from broken bones. The remaining participants huddled together and were gripped by shock. Their perception of the wilderness was now a harsh reality of survival. The bear, still nearby and watching warily, had retreated but not disappeared. The instructors faced a critical choice: stay and fortify the camp, risking another attack, or abandon it and seek safety, leaving behind their injured companions. As dawn broke, the site of the bear's attack was stark. The campsite was a mess of scattered pots, torn fabric, and blood-stained ground. Tobin lay on a makeshift stretcher, pale and sweating, his leg severely wounded and him in shock. Astrid, with a broken arm and multiple bruises, was immobile and groaning faintly. The group, though physically unharmed, moved like ghosts through the wreckage, their initial sense of adventure replaced by the grim reality of survival. They now faced a stark choice: confront nature's indifference or become another statistic in the relentless Canadian wilderness. The remote Alaskan wilderness had always been a cherished retreat for Terrence Byrne and Finnegan Whitaker. Friends since childhood, they had spent decades embarking on fishing trips to the world's most secluded spots. This year, they ventured to the Chillicothe River deep in Alaska's backcountry, seeking the peace and solitude of its pristine banks. Upon arrival, the morning air was crisp, with a heavy mist cloaking the river. The men set up camp by a tranquil bend, a location they had carefully chosen weeks in advance. Terrence, stocky and broad-shouldered, marveled at the untouched landscape, while Finnegan, leaner and wiry, prepared their gear. Both in their late 40s, they showed signs of aging, but still retained the stamina for their outdoor adventures. The hours passed quietly, marked only by the gentle lapping of water and the occasional cast of a fishing line. The river teemed with trout, their silvery bodies darting beneath the surface. The friends were absorbed in their routine of casting and reeling, relishing their annual escape from everyday life. As noon approached, the fog lifted, revealing the towering pines and rugged peaks in the distance. The wilderness felt timeless, its vastness making them feel both small and alive. However, the wild is notoriously unpredictable. Terrence, engrossed in fishing, barely noticed the faint rustling in the underbrush. Finnegan, however, spotted movement in the dense forest, a massive grizzly bear foraging for berries. The bear, though large and imposing, was a reasonable distance away and seemed disinterested in the men. Grizzly bears were common in the area, and the men were familiar with wilderness safety. They had taken all necessary precautions, storing food properly and keeping noise to a minimum. Finnegan's heart raced, but he remained calm. The bear, while a powerful symbol of the wild, appeared focused on its search for berries. The grizzly occasionally sniffed the air, but seemed more intrigued by the berries than by the fishermen. Finnegan glanced at Terrence, who nodded in silent agreement. They continued fishing, avoiding sudden movements or noise, allowing the bear to go about its business. The afternoon wore on, and the bear gradually disappeared into the thicker foliage, leaving the men to enjoy their solitude once more. But there was an underlying tension now, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The wilderness felt less predictable, more ominous, as though the vast forest was watching them. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the water, Terrence and Finnegan began to pack up their gear. They moved methodically, still cautious from the earlier encounter. The light was fading, and they knew better than to linger too long in bear country at dusk. The river's banks, once bathed in sunlight, were now cloaked in an eerie stillness. The sounds of birds had ceased, and the air had grown colder. Then from the forest's edge, the grizzly reappeared. It was closer this time, its dark eyes fixed on the two men. Finnegan's heart sank. Something was different. The bear was no longer foraging. It was watching them. Its massive body swayed as it moved toward the river, slow but deliberate. Every instinct in Finnegan's body screamed for him to stay calm, but a rising sense of dread began to take hold. Terence, ever the pragmatic one, motioned for them to keep packing, his movements deliberate but strained. They had to leave, and quickly. The bear, now at the river's edge, stopped and sniffed the air again, its nostrils flaring. Time seemed to stretch in those few moments, every second of a lifetime, as the men continued packing, trying not to provoke the animal. But the bear's disinterest was gone. Without warning, it lowered its head and began to move toward them, first slowly, then picking up speed. Its massive paws pounded the earth, each thud sending tremors through the ground. It was charging. Terence barely had time to react. One moment he was securing his fishing rod. The next, a grizzly bear struck him like a freight train. The impact knocked him off his feet, sending him crashing into the river. The icy water exploded around him as the bear dragged him further into the depths, its immense strength overpowering Terence's desperate struggles. Frozen in shock, Finnegan could only watch as the bear, driven by primal rage, clamped its jaws onto Terence's shoulder and pulled him deeper into the river. The water churned red with Terence's blood, each violent thrash of the bear's claws ripping into him. Panic surged through Finnegan. He wanted to help, but knew any attempt would end in his death. The bear's savage assault left no room for hope. Terence's attempts to free himself only seemed to escalate the bear's aggression, the creature's roars echoing through the valley as it tore into him. Finnegan's breath quickened, adrenaline fueling his decision to flee. There was no saving Terence now. He turned and sprinted toward the forest, his boots splashing through the water. The sounds of the river and the bear's growls faded as he plunged into the dense woods. Branches lashed at him, and the uneven terrain threatened to trip him, but he pushed forward, driven by a singular focus: to get help. Hours later, exhausted and disoriented, Finnegan stumbled upon a ranger station. He collapsed at the door, breathless and incoherent, as he relayed the horrifying details of the attack. Authorities responded quickly, but they knew the grim reality of grisly encounters. A search team was dispatched to the river, but the chances of finding Terence alive were slim. The river, once turbulent, was now eerily calm. Bloodstains and torn clothing marked the scene, but the bear and Terence were gone. The wilderness had swallowed the tragedy, leaving behind only its harsh scars. The authorities issued warnings about the dangers of fishing in a bear country. The attack, though rare, was a stark reminder of the wilderness's unpredictability. Terence's body was never recovered, lost to the river and the wilds. Finnegan, haunted by the events, never returned to Alaska. The fishing trips that once defined his friendship with Terence now lingered as painful memories overshadowed by the tragic loss. A thick mist clung to the edge of the Alaskan wilderness, blurring the boundary between the expansive forest and the small town of Harvold. Life in Harvold was a delicate balance between man and nature, with the townspeople respecting the wilderness's power and knowing the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Here, predators roamed freely, and survival was a constant challenge. Lucas Griegson, a seasoned hunter whose family had lived in these lands long before Harvold existed, was deeply attuned to the land. Known for his prowess in hunting and trapping, Lucas could take down a moose with a single shot and track wolves through blizzards. Yet recently, Lucas sensed something was amiss. A few weeks ago, livestock began disappearing at the edge of town. Initially suspected to be wolves or a mountain lion, the signs soon revealed a far more brutal presence. Animals weren't just killed. They were mauled and torn apart, their remains scattered across the frozen ground. Lucas examined the grisly evidence up close. Deep claw marks, shattered bones, and the unmistakable signs of a grizzly bear, most likely a rogue one. While grizzlies were common in the area, they typically avoided human settlements, preferring the more profound wilderness. But this bear seemed different. It had ventured closer to town, possibly due to sickness or a new relentless hunger. The bear's increasing proximity was a growing concern for the city. Tensions mounted. The townspeople locked their doors at night, kept children close, and avoided the forests. Hunters were on high alert, and patrols around the town increased. Yet a pervasive unease lingered, knowing that something was watching from the vast wilderness. That tension reached a peak one bitterly cold evening. The wind howled, and darkness swallowed the last remnants of daylight. Harvold huddled in its small valley, its wooden cabins lit by flickering lights. The snow crunched underfoot as the Hansen family, living on the town's edge, went about their evening routine. Unbeknownst to them, they were being observed. In the cover of the forest, the rogue Grizzly moved silently, its massive form gliding through the trees. Drawn by the scent of food and the barking of the family dog, it had been watching the Hansen property, preparing for its next move. The bear was no longer the majestic creature of the wild it once was. Hunger, rage, and perhaps madness had taken hold. Its once thick fur was matted and patchy, its eyes gleamed with a feverish intensity, and its movements had become erratic, unpredictable. It had grown bold, far too daring, and now it was only feet away from the town. In the fading light, the grizzly emerged from the forest, its hulking form barely visible against the backdrop of snow and trees. The Hansen's dog, a loyal and energetic Malamute, caught sight of the bear first. It barked wildly, hackles raised, warning its owners of the approaching danger. But the bear was not deterred by the noise. It charged, moving with horrifying speed for something so significant. The attack was swift and brutal. The bear barreled through the backyard, jaws snapping as it seized the dog in its powerful grip. The Malamute yelped in pain, its body flailing as the grizzly shook it violently. Blood sprayed across the snow, painting the once peaceful yard in a gruesome tableau. Inside the house, the Hansens heard the commotion. The bark turning into high-pitched cries, the thud of something heavy slamming into the ground. They rushed to the window, their hearts sinking as they saw the massive shape of the grizzly in their yard. The bear stood over the broken body of their dog, its muzzle covered in blood. For a moment, it seemed as though time stopped, the sheer shock of the sight freezing them in place. But the bear wasn't finished. It lifted its head, its nose twitching as it caught the scent of the humans inside the house. Without hesitation, it turned its attention toward the home, moving toward the sliding glass door at the back of this property. The fragile barrier between the family and the deadly predator seemed laughable in the face of such raw power. Lucas, who lived just a short distance away, had been outside when he heard the dog's frantic barking. He knew that sound. It was a sound of imminent danger. Without thinking, he grabbed his rifle and bolted in the direction of the noise, his heart pounding in his chest. He could already guess what was happening, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him when he reached the Hansen property. The towering and monstrous bear was only a few feet from the house, its breath visible in the cold air, mingling with the blood of the fallen dog. The Hansens were trapped inside, helpless as the beast approached. Lucas raised his rifle, taking aim at the bear's massive form. He had hunted bears before, but never like this. Never one that was so close to the town, so utterly unafraid. He fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the silent forest. The bullet struck the bear in the side, a clean hit, but it wasn't enough. The grizzly roared in fury, spinning toward Lucas with terrifying speed. In an instant, the predator had abandoned its assault on the house and charged toward him, its eyes burning with rage. Lucas barely had time to react. He fired another shot, but the bear was already upon him. Its massive paw swiped at him, claws tearing through his coat and flesh. The force of the blow sent him sprawling into the snow. His rifle was knocked from his hands. Pain shot through his body, but there was no time to dwell on it. The bear was on top of him, its weight crushing, its breath hot and stinky. The bear attacked Lucas with ferocious abandon, its claws and teeth tearing through his flesh. Lucas struggled against the beast, grappling with its thick fur, but its strength was overpowering. As they fought, they tumbled into a nearby creek, the cold water rushing over the rocks. Lucas tried to escape, his hands scrabbling for purchase, but the bear's grip was ironclad. It dragged him under the icy water, pushing him down with relentless force. The cold was a sharp shock, but the bear's weight pressing him beneath the surface was far worse. The water churned as the bear used its massive paws to keep Lucas submerged. His lungs burned as he fought for air, but the bear pressed him more profoundly, the icy water filling his mouth and nose. His vision blurred, and the world around him faded as the bear's monstrous form loomed above. Eventually, Lucas's struggles ceased, his strength drained by the cold and the bear's assault. Sensing victory, the bear released his lifeless body, which floated away with the current. As night fell, the bear vanished into the forest, leaving Harvold in fear. The town, now on high alert, began a desperate hunt for the rogue Grizzly, living in constant dread of the beast's return. A group of climbers had meticulously planned their ascent for months, studying the Rocky Mountains' contours and plotting every route to one of its most challenging peaks. Led by Bram Morrow, an experienced mountaineer, the team included Kylan Thorne, a focused veteran, Merritt Hagen, a seasoned wilderness guide, Cassidy Lore, a young but skilled alpine climber, and Soren, whose quiet demeanor masked his extensive mountain knowledge. Their journey began on a crisp morning as they set out toward the towering peak. Carrying gear for a week-long expedition, food, tents, ropes, climbing equipment, and bear spray, they faced the Rocky Mountains' daunting yet exhilarating challenge. For days, their climb progressed smoothly. They navigated steep ridges, narrow passes, and icy trails, synchronizing their movements as they scaled rock faces and trudged through the snow. At night, they camped in sheltered spots, conserving warmth as temperatures plummeted. The distant wildlife sounds were their only company, and danger seemed distant. On the fifth day, they approached the most challenging section, a nearly vertical ascent along a narrow ridge. They reached a plateau near a river, intending to camp for the night. The rushing water offered a brief reprieve from their exertions. As dusk fell, Soren secured the tent ropes while Merritt and Bram scouted for a fire spot. Cassidy admired the river's beauty while filling a water canister, feeling an uneasy chill she attributed to exhaustion. Kylan, ever vigilant, noticed an eerie silence in the forest. Scanning the tree line, he saw a massive grizzly bear emerging from the brush, its dark fur matted and its size overwhelming. The bear, likely drawn by their scent or noise, approached their camp with deliberate steps. Kylan signaled frantically to the others, silently mouthing "bear" and pointing. The team froze, their training kicking in. Bram reached for the bear spray, signaling everyone to do the same. Despite their preparedness, the sight of the massive beast invoked a palpable tension, a stark reminder of the wild's unpredictable nature. They stood in a tight formation, hoping that their presence would deter the bear from coming any closer. But the grizzly was undeterred. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air again, detecting something it liked, perhaps the scent of food in their packs. It began moving toward them with increasing speed, its massive paws thudding against the ground. Bram and the others knew they had to stay calm, but adrenaline surged through them, heightening their senses. The bear was closing the distance rapidly, and it was clear that this was no bluff charge. The animal's ears were flat against its head, its gaze locked onto them. Without warning, the bear broke into a full sprint, covering the ground between them in seconds. Merritt, thinking quickly, deployed his bear spray, a plume of aerosol mist hissing into the air in the bear's direction. The grizzly hesitated, but only for a moment. It reared up on its hind legs, roaring in anger, its massive frame towering over them. The bear spray had only managed to enrage the beast further. In a moment of pure terror, Soren, who had been standing closest to the bear, made a panicked decision. He turned and ran, his legs propelling him toward the cliffs that bordered the river, his mind overwhelmed by the primal instinct to flee. The others shouted in their minds, knowing that running was the worst possible reaction, but there was nothing they could do to stop him. The bear, its predatory instincts fully engaged, immediately gave chase. Soren's footfalls were frantic as he sprinted toward the cliffside, his breath ragged in his chest. Behind him, the bear closed in, its powerful body moving with frightening speed. Every fiber of Soren's being was focused on escape, but the terrain was unforgiving, the cliffside offering little in the way of shelter. Within moments, the bear was upon him, swiping at him with a massive paw. The blow sent him sprawling, his body slamming into the ground with a sickening thud. He scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from where the bear's claws had raked his back, but the cliffside offered no refuge. Soren reached the edge of the precipice, his boots slipping on loose gravel as he peered down at the raging river 30 feet below. The water churned violently, a deadly current awaiting him. Behind, the bear growled menacingly, its presence a thunderous reminder of the danger he faced. Cornered with no escape, Soren turned to confront the bear, hoping to intimidate it or find a way around. But the grizzly was relentless. It lunged again, and Soren lost his footing, teetering on the cliff's edge. With one final mighty shove, the bear sent him hurtling into the river below. The icy water enveloped him instantly, dragging him under before he could react. The current tossed him violently, and his gear weighed him down, making it impossible to fight the mighty river. From the cliffside, the remaining climbers watched in horror as Soren vanished beneath the turbulent waters. The bear, seemingly satisfied, lingered briefly at the edge before retreating into the forest. The climbers were left stunned and paralyzed with fear, their sense of invincibility shattered by the brutal loss of their friend. The once majestic wilderness now seemed hostile and unforgiving. Bram, pale and troubled, motioned for the group to pack up. Their movements were mechanical, devoid of hope or purpose. No one dared to search the river. They knew the fast-moving water had likely carried Soren far away, beyond any hope of recovery. The climb to the summit was abandoned. A tense silence marked the descent, every sound amplified, every rustle or snap of a branch causing hearts to race. The mountain, once a symbol of their goal, now loomed overhead as a stark reminder of their loss. By the time they reached the base, they were physically and emotionally exhausted, their minds burdened by the tragedy that had unfolded. The memory of Soren's death would forever haunt them, a grim reminder of nature's unforgiving power. A group of 5 set off early in the morning from the Denali National Park trailhead. The sky was painted in soft pinks and blues, gently illuminating the towering peaks of the Alaska Range. The trail, popular with experienced hikers, led them through the rugged wilderness up into the mountains. The late summer air was crisp but not biting, adding to their excitement for the adventure ahead. At the trailhead, they had noted a recent bear sighting on the notice board. As seasoned hikers, they were familiar with such warnings, but took them in stride. Denali was bear country, home to many grizzlies, and encounters, while rare, were part of the risk. The group, led by Eric, a tall and experienced hiker from the Midwest, with friends August, Colleen, and siblings Dakota and Elias, had packed bear spray and adhered to safety protocols, including making noise and staying together. The hike started smoothly. They traversed through spruce and birch forests before emerging into the alpine tundra, where the vast mountains seemed to engulf the sky. The untouched beauty of the Alaskan wilderness was awe-inspiring, a stark contrast to the modern world. As they gained elevation, they noticed fresh bear tracks in the soft earth, large, unmistakable prints that meandered off into the brush. Colleen, the most cautious, pointed them out. Though the tracks were recent and clearly from a grizzly, Eric reassured the group, and they continued, feeling secure with the sun high and the group together. Hours later, the trail became steeper and rockier, the air thinner, and the terrain jagged. The group slowed, stopping occasionally to catch their breath or admire the views. The initial tension from the bear tracks faded, replaced by the routine of hiking. Eric led, Dakota and Elias stayed in the middle, while Colleen, feeling fatigued, lingered behind. Unbeknownst to them, a massive, emaciated grizzly had been tracking them. Driven by hunger and desperation, it had picked up their scent earlier, drawn by the smell of food and human presence. The bear, whose ribs were visible through its ragged fur, had become more aggressive and bold in its search for an easy meal. As the afternoon light cast long shadows, the bear's patience snapped. It moved closer, its massive paws silent on the forest floor, eyes fixed on the lagging Colleen. Absorbed in her exhaustion, she hadn't noticed the subtle changes in her environment, the sudden silence of the birds or the shifting wind. The bear's approach was slow and deliberate. With each step, the threat grew closer, hidden by the thick brush. The group, immersed in their hike and their growing fatigue, remained oblivious to the predator stalking them from the shadows. Suddenly there was a crack, a sharp snap of a branch, and Colleen turned, her eyes wide. A moment of eerie silence hung in the air before the underbrush exploded with movement. The grizzly charged. Colleen barely had time to react. Her body froze for a split second, instinctual terror rooting her to the spot. Then she ran. The others were too far ahead to hear the initial crash of the bear's approach. By the time Colleen screamed, it was too late. The bear, propelled by hunger and primal aggression, was upon her in an instant. It barreled through the brush, its enormous form a blur of fur and muscle, knocking her to the ground with a force that drove the air from her lungs. The impact was brutal. Colleen felt the weight of the beast press down on her, its claws tearing into her pack and ripping through the fabric like paper. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, her hands fumbling for the bear spray at her side. But the grizzly's ferocity overwhelmed her. The scent of wet earth and the musky odor of the bear filled her nostrils, mixing with the coppery tang of blood. The others, alerted by the noise, turned to see the horror unfolding behind them. Eric shouted something incomprehensible, his voice carried away by the wind as he and the others scrambled back down the trail. But the bear's focus was singular. It had chosen its prey. In the chaos, Colleen managed to wriggle free for a moment, rolling to her feet and staggering toward the riverbank, her breath ragged and panicked. The river, swollen from recent rains, roared nearby, its waters fast and unforgiving. But there was no time to think. The bear was on her again, its jaws clamping down on her shoulder with a sickening crunch. The pain was blinding. Colleen screamed as the bear dragged her toward the water, its claws digging into her flesh. She kicked and fought, but the grizzly was relentless, its hunger driving it into a frenzy. With a final violent shove, the bear and Colleen tumbled into the river. The icy water engulfed them both, the current immediately pulling them downstream. Colleen thrashed in the water, trying desperately to stay afloat, but the bear, still latched onto her, dragged her down. The river churned violently, sweeping them along the jagged rocks and over submerged logs. Colleen's body slammed into the debris, her vision going in and out of focus as the cold and shock took hold. The others reached the riverbank just in time to see the horrifying scene. Eric, August, Dakota, and Elias stood helplessly, watching as the bear and Colleen were carried downstream. They shouted and screamed her name, but there was nothing they could do. The river was too fast and too dangerous. They could only watch as the bear, still gripping Colleen in its jaws, disappeared around a bend, the water swallowing them both. For what felt like an eternity, the group stood frozen, paralyzed by the horror they had just witnessed. Their minds struggled to process the brutality and speed at which everything had happened. Eric was the first to break from the trance, pulling out his phone and shaking hands to call for help, though deep down, they all knew it was too late. Park officials arrived hours later, long after the river had calmed and the sun had begun to dip below the horizon. Search teams scoured the area, but as night fell, the chances of finding Colleen or even recovering her body grew slim. The river was notorious for its hidden dangers, and the bear, driven by hunger and instinct, would not have left much behind. The following day, Denali National Park officials launched a review. The incident, though rare, was a stark reminder of the wilderness's unpredictable dangers. Warnings about bear sightings were updated, and discussions began about implementing stricter trail safety protocols. Bear activity in the area was increasing, and hikers were urged to take even greater precautions. But for the group, those changes came too late. Colleen was gone, her life claimed by the unforgiving wilderness of Denali. The park, which was as beautiful and awe-inspiring as it was, had shown its darker side. A reminder that in this vast, untamed land, nature ruled supreme, and even the most experienced hikers were not immune to its dangers.